Can a single speech really destroy a person's career? I mean, completely and utterly ruin the reputation of a national hero? Well, we're about to dive into the story of one of America's most celebrated politicians, a man they literally called godlike, and how one single 3.5-hour speech brought his entire world crashing down.
These words are from a poem called Ichabod. It's a biblical name and it means the glory has departed. And honestly, it was written in this state of just pure shock. It just perfectly captures this feeling of betrayal that swept across the country after the speech we're about to get into. So here's the big question, right? This is the mystery we're unpacking. The man was Daniel Webster, an absolute political giant. So how did he go from being the nation's guiding star to this fallen angel? What could he possibly have said? To really get why this was such a huge fall, you first have to understand just how high up he was.
Okay, so before 1850, you have to understand Daniel Webster wasn't just some politician. He was basically an American icon. And no, that's not me exaggerating. People actually genuinely called him godlike Daniel. I mean, can you imagine? His booming voice, his command of a room, his brilliant legal mind, it all made him a superstar, especially in the North. He was seen as the very pinnacle of American intellect.
And this line right here, this is what sealed the deal. It's from a famous debate 20 years earlier, and it cemented his entire reputation. To his followers, Daniel Webster was the Union. He was its fiercest defender, arguing that the nation had to stick together no matter what. Definitely keep this quote in mind. It's going to be really important in a minute.
And that brings us to the exact moment it all changed, March 7th, 1850. The day Webster walked into the Senate and delivered the speech that would forever define and doom his legacy.
So, let's set the scene. The country was at a breaking point. The whole debate over slavery in new territories had the South threatening to just pack up and leave. The Compromise of 1850 was this last-ditch effort to keep everything from falling apart. But it had a poison pill for the North, a brand new, way harsher fugitive slave law that legally required citizens in the North to help slave catchers.
So Webster gets up there, and he frames his whole argument so carefully. He tries to rise above it all. He says, look, I'm not speaking for my anti-slavery friends in Massachusetts. I'm speaking for the United States of America. He was putting the Union above all else, but in doing that, he accidentally showed everyone this deep, philosophical crack running right through the foundation of the country.
And this is really what it all boils down to, this clash of two big ideas. On one side, you have Webster, who argued for what's called positive law. Basically, the law is the law, the Constitution is the ultimate authority, and if you protect slavery, well, you have to obey it to save the country. But his opponents, people like Ralph Waldo Emerson, they argued for a higher law. This idea that our own conscience, our own sense of right and wrong, is more important than any law written down on paper.
Well, Webster chose the law of the land over the law of the heart. And the reaction from the people who had idolized him, it was immediate, and it was furious. What's kind of wild is that Webster was so proud of this speech, he had over 120,000 copies printed up and shipped all over the North. He thought he was explaining his great patriotic sacrifice. What he was actually doing was mass mailing the evidence of his own betrayal. For his supporters, it was just so simple. The great defender of liberty and union had picked union over liberty. By backing a law that forced them to take part in slavery, Webster had committed what they saw as an unforgivable moral sin. The glory had, without a doubt, departed. And the backlash wasn't just angry letters. It set off this huge intellectual battle, and it was led by one of Webster's old admirers, Ralph Waldo Emerson. So both of these guys talked about natural law, but they meant completely different things. Webster's take was that, hey, things like geography and climate, they decide where slavery makes economic sense, and he called that a law of nature. Emerson's response was just profound. He basically said, no, the real laws of nature are our moral feelings, our conscience, and no law made by man can ever justly violate that. And that led Emerson to this conclusion. He wasn't just saying he disagreed with the fugitive slave law, he was declaring that it was a citizen's moral duty to break it. This was a full-on assault against everything Webster stood for.
Emerson's lectures, they were powerful, for sure, especially for the intellectual types. But it took another writer, Harriet Beecher Stowe, to make the entire nation feel this debate in its heart.
So this was the challenge Stowe faced. It's one thing to hear a lecture about a higher law. It's something else entirely to actually experience the human suffering that an unjust law causes. So how could she pull that off?
She did it with a story. In her novel, Uncle Tom's Cabin, she creates this character, Senator Byrd, who is, let's be honest, a stand-in for Daniel Webster. He votes for the law, arguing that his public duty comes before his private feelings. But his wife, she appeals to that higher law, their Christian faith. And then, bam, the test arrives. A terrified woman named Eliza shows up at their door, holding her child, begging for help. And in that one moment, all the political theory just crumbles. Faced with a real human being, Senator Byrd follows his conscience and breaks the very law he just voted for.
And this is why Stowe's novel hit so hard. She basically took Emerson's philosophical argument and made it real, made it breathe. She turned the debate from some abstract political idea into an urgent, emotional, human crisis that millions of people could read about and feel for themselves.
So, after all this, after this epic clash between law and morality, what was the final outcome?
For Daniel Webster, the cost was just immense. Any dream he had of being president was gone. The man once called godlike was now seen as this tragic fallen hero. He chose the Union, right, as it was written down in the law. He chose that above everything else. And you could argue his speech helped delay the Civil War for a bit. But in that process, he lost his moral authority, he lost his followers, he lost his light.
And you know, it leaves us with the same question they were wrestling with back then. Webster, Emerson, Stowe, they all had different answers, and that whole debate shaped the direction of a nation. It's a question that never really gets old, does it? When the laws of the land clash with the laws of your own heart, what's the right thing to do?